everybody, and welcome to our first breakout session of the day. And here we're going to be talking about from numbers to narrative and how you really can use data as an asset. My name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm the director of NextGen at GovLoop. And if you're coming from the keynote, well, thanks for popping over. And if you're brand new to this session, we're just glad to have you. And I'm looking forward, of course, to the rest of the summit. So let's talk specifically about this session. When advocating for a new project or pitching an innovative idea or program, asking for funds, let's say, or anything along those lines, it's imperative for you to use data to back up your argument. But it isn't always easy to turn data into a compelling argument. Well, if you're anything like me and perhaps not a data scientist, or you get a little nervous when the word Excel gets thrown around a lot. I know I can be that way. So today our experts are going to give us some inside tips on the idea of data storytelling. But first, I've got a few housekeeping items to go over. First things first, if you're on Twitter, we'd love to know what you are learning alongside us using the hashtag NextGenGov. On there, you can share your takeaways and let us know. We've also got some great resources available for you to download on the right-hand side of your console. That includes this slide deck with all the great info that our speakers have compiled. So make sure you check those out. Of course, we hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but they can and do happen. And if they do, send us a message to that Ask a Question tab, and my colleague Blake will be there to get your questions answered. And here's the secret sauce of this session, friends. It's in that same portal where you can ask our experts questions. So don't you dare be shy. Put your questions in early and often. We also have the open chat available for you today, so you can throw your commentary in there as well. Of course, if you do miss any tidbits along the way, don't worry. We're going to email you a link to the entire event tomorrow, which will be sent directly to your inbox, so don't worry about that. Finally, we are giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation in today's summit. There are 3 things you need to do that. First, stay and participate for the entire session. You're not going anywhere anyways. 2, take all the polls. And 3, fill out your post-event CPE evaluation to obtain your credit. You can find the CPE evaluation in the resource module on the console or in the resource center of the main event. All CPEs will be emailed directly to you once we confirm you've met all of the requirements. All right. With all of the housekeeping out of the way, I want to introduce you to our experts. Joining us are Dr. Craig Orgeron, who's the Professor of Management for Information Systems at Millsaps College, and Dr. Bill Rials, who's the Associate Director and Professor of Practice at Tulane University School of Professional Advancement Information Technology Programs. That is certainly a mouthful. Thank you both so much for being here with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to the two of you.
Gosh, thank you, Emily. What a wonderful introduction. What Bill and I can assure you is that you do not have to be afraid of Excel. You do not have to be afraid of Excel. We're gonna work through that today. So, welcome everybody. Bill and I are here to really talk about something that's interesting, right? So we're inundated with data in the world we live in, and really what we're talking about is the ability to create a narrative. Really, it's storytelling. That's what we're talking about with data. Maybe, as Emily noted, you're trying to get funding for a project. Maybe you're trying to develop partnerships across agencies or within your own agency. Being able to relate this way with a narrative that is both data-centric, that we'll talk about, but being able to ultimately tell a story. That is what we're going to focus on. We, Bill and I, in our academic careers and in our government careers, certainly had expertise in doing that. And that's what we're going to talk about. Bill, how did I do? Is this what we're going to focus on today as we jump in?
That sounds exciting, Craig. I think that's a very good opening. And also thank you, Emily, as well. And sometimes when we talk about data in projecting projects or technical ideas, it gets real complicated. I like to think about having a mental rubric. We have these stories, we put it in a story format instead of just throwing the data out there. When we do that, you have to have a claim, a reason, and produce evidence. This is the data and the metrics, and then some type of cause of action. When we think about a claim, what are you going to improve? You don't want to do something which I've been guilty of in the past for inefficiencies, all this expanded flowery language when you do these presentations around data. We aim to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our digital transformation by creating a paradigm shift in the blah, 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 blah. It just goes right over everybody's head, and nobody understands what you're talking about and never gets anywhere. You want to have real claims. We want to improve XYZ impact by 20%. Now, it doesn't have to be a lot of claims. It doesn't have to be many, but it's got to be something that your audience can grab a hold to and it means something to them. And you want to have a reason. You want to justify this claim that you've already made. You want to justify it. And you do that with evidence, data, and metrics. We can improve this process by 20% because of this one specific deficiency or something like that. But you want to be targeted. And then you back up those claims and the reasoning with evidence. And your evidence can be a narrative through the storytelling. It could be data, metrics like we're talking about today. Or what you want to do is throughout your presentation of storytelling within your data, you want to instill a belief into your audience, to believe in your claim, the reason that you projected with the evidence of data. But most importantly, you want to prompt for some type of action. If you're just telling a story, you have this data, there's tons of metrics. There's this Excel spreadsheet that Emily talked about. There's a lot of data and a lot of pivot tables and charts and graphs. With that, unless you're prompting for some type of action, you want your audience to accept a change in an action, a behavior, or a belief at the end of it. Without that, then you're really not moving forward. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. As a high level, that's what I'm thinking, Craig.
Yeah, I totally agree, Bill. And so I tell you what, you mentioned something that this is often talked about. This is a skill, right? That what we're talking about here is a skill. And the beautiful part about a skill is you can get better at it. So I tell you what, let's get started with our first poll question. So Emily has pulled up our poll question. Emily, let me turn it over to you to let our audience sort of see this as a way to get our conversation started.
Yeah, so here's the poll question. It's thinking about your role in the next big change or changes. What skills do you need to improve to be successful? And you've got a couple options here: technical skills, negotiation skills, influencing, business acumen, personal communication, or other. There are a lot of options here. And I think if I was answering this, which we all know because I was transparent at the very beginning, I got to up some of my technical skills when it comes to some of these data related aspects. I'm curious to see what other folks have in mind. And I'll give you about 30 more seconds to answer the poll. And while you do, one of the folks, Craig, in the chat said, data literacy is a big want, and want is in all capitals in my workplace. I think this is something that for so many of us, we're craving the access and the ability to utilize all the data that government agencies are collecting, because they've got troves and troves of data. Is that something that you're seeing really resonate when you were in government, and then also kind of what you're seeing now?
Oh gosh, 100%. I think not just literacy though. It needs to be contextualized, Emily. It needs to be, getting at the data and being literate with it is really part and parcel to, as Bill talked about, getting to solving a problem. Right? I mean, that's what we really want to be able to do with this data, is solve the problems, enhance the citizen experience. That's what it's about.
I love that.
So just to add to that, Emily, what I found in my time in government, also after consulting with agencies today, is getting a grapple on what data is out there. A lot of agencies in large jurisdictions are still unaware of what data exists. Before we even can talk about data literacy, we need to find out where the data is and who has it and what makes it available. And then we can start on this process of increasing the data maturity level.
Love it. All right. The results of the poll are in, and topping out the list here is influencing stakeholders, which we love. And then my compatriots here in the technical skills.
Yeah, phenomenal. So this is so interesting, right? Because what we know about the world we live in today is that change is constant, right? And that's a phrase that we shouldn't really roll our eyes at anymore, because even if you think about the last handful of months and generative AI and sort of even something like that, which has really taken over so many of these conversations. But what I wanted to share pretty interestingly here is this is some data on the very question we asked. And this data comes from the Gartner group that did a survey. So it's pretty amazing that our results were in the 40+% for influencing stakeholders. And that is actually exactly what Gartner found as well. But interestingly, look at this. Personal communication comes in nearly close with business acumen. And, you know, Emily, so interesting, technical skills rolls in at 29%. So I think one of the things we're going to tease out today is to really, really enhance your skills, which is what our session is all about. It really is learning about the influence of stakeholders. You are doing that through communication and the acumen that you have. That is what is so critical as we look at this to move forward with. So Bill, what are some strategies to help with this concept of influencing by using stories and data?
Yeah, good question, Craig. And to the data that you presented and the data that our audience did to the poll question, it's right on track and target with what I've seen. And I'm going to put on my university professor hat for a second. When looking at the programs, the IT programs, I did a nationwide survey, talked to industry leaders or employers who are hiring graduates. And, you know, I said, what skills do you need if I'm going to develop an IT program? And what do we need to train our students on? And believe it or not, by and far wide margin wasn't so much the technical skills. It was business acumen and business communication. A lot of times, especially in the IT space, we may be good at those technical skills, but we don't have the ability. And I'm one of those, you know, purely an IT&J personality, you know, technical widget maker, unable early in my career to speak the language of executive presentations and giving out that technical knowledge in such a way, business acumen and professional communication with technical aspects, you know, storytelling, you know, so this kind of goes with it. So one of the strategies of using data and being able to wrap it up in a wrapper in such a way that you can influence others to number one, understand it. We talked about data literacy, but also to accept that it is something that we need to do in our organization based off the data, not just the data itself. So Craig, you've been a successful leader, you know, and my leader for many years. You got some strategies too. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you can do to influence others by using stories and data as well.
Yeah, Bill. I mean, so let me just say that I think you're using the right word, right? This is about the ability to influence, right? So not only did our audience kind of do a little mini validation of data that we had done some research on, that Gartner had collected, but really this concept of being able to influence, being able to be persuasive, whether it's seeking funding, whether it's partnerships, right? Whether it's maybe communicating with elected officials like we did many times, the ability to influence is really, really critical. So one of the ways to do that, of course, is one of the ways, and Gartner talks about this, I think, really, really well, is to create very convincing and pragmatic stories about your organization, right? And you and I worked together for many years, and I think it's really critical to be able to do that. So one of the ways to do that when we talk about the creation of organizational stories is to stay really focused on the strategy, right? Which is so, so critical. Now, in the public sector, there can be a difference with private sector, public sector. And it's worth at least acknowledging this, right? That many times in the private sector, it may be about, if you've created value, it may be about capturing that value with revenue and profitability. But in the public sector, we're very mission focused and driven, which I love. That's really the thing that kind of gets you out of bed every day. But this strategy piece is really about using strategic data and data elements and metrics to tell these stories. And that's what we're going to dig into. So obviously, this one component on an organizational level is what we want to really focus on. How do we do that? It's quite possible that we may use visualizations to do that, right? So you can use, there are lots of tools out there. There's Power BI or there's Tableau. But to be able to communicate visually is a very, very compelling skill set from a storytelling perspective, right? Because what you really want to do is to be able to do that while keeping what we call the cognitive load low. So you don't really want to overwhelm with so many charts and graphs that you just sort of can't wrap your head around it, right? You don't want to do that at all. So given that the goals for storytelling with visualizations, you want to be able to record information, you want to be able to analyze and explore data. So some of these may be a bit interactive, doing some exploratory data analysis. And as always, you want to be able to communicate and explain to others. That is really the key, right? So, Bill, do you agree? I mean, talk about the importance of storytelling. What is top of mind for you here?
So what's top of mind, especially looking at some of the examples that you were showing on the visualizations? I get asked that question a lot. Well, why do I have to tell a story? Why can't I just show the data, show the graph, and it's quite obvious? Well, my thoughts on why we use stories as a wrapper around our data is multiple reasons. One is that they're hardwired. Since our birth, we've been told stories, and it means something to us. We love to hear stories, and what's important, we remember the good ones. If you can tell a good story, you're kind of packaging up your overall idea and project into a pre-formatted memory box. That's what you want. You want your audience member to remember your story because it's telling something that you want, your project, your idea, your budget funding, or whatever you're doing. It just happens to have data to support it. And also, stories are very emotional and they're familiar. And you can fill in the details of what you want to, your narrative, with data. But think about some of your best stories you've heard, the ones that are the reason why you think about them, you remember them because they have an emotional reaction. So the best stories will inject some type of emotional reaction. It doesn't have to be a positive one. It doesn't have to be a negative, but some type of emotional reaction. And also, stories, they affirm our beliefs. Think about your favorite story. As the story unfolds, you start to see yourself in the story, and you start to see your beliefs of what you think should happen or shouldn't happen, or how you would react to things based on what's going on in that story. The best stories do that, and the more we can get their audience to see themselves in your story that you're portraying with your data, the more memorable and hardwired and action oriented it will be. And also, stories, they project this idea of a role model. As storytellers, we have the unique ability to create these role models. Think about if you ever watched a good movie, seen a James Bond movie or any other action hero movie. Once you walk out of the movie theater, don't you feel a little taller, a little stronger, maybe even a little faster? It's what happens, right? That's why car companies or any businesses like to integrate into these movies, because they know that we all want to follow along with the hero in the story as the role model in the story. And most importantly, I've said this several times, stories are memorable. No one is going to remember that set of data as well as the story associated with that set of data. So there's good ways and bad ways. I wouldn't say right or wrong. Everybody's got their method, but what we don't want to do is overcomplicate the situation. This is why stories work. We've been talking about using stories in this lecture today about different ways to package it with data, why they work, why stories work well for you. We use stories to sell your ideas that you may have. And you tell these stories to your teams or maybe even to yourself. And we want to get our presentations to get our organizations to shift to do something different based on a piece of technology, based on the metrics that we have, or any concept or idea. If we do it the wrong way, the traditional way, we use bullet lists. We use jargon, technical speak, business speak even. Sometimes I call it BS. We're going to lose people. We present these ideas to other folks in our organization, and all we're going to do is just inject a lot of confusion. So if we use what I'm calling the wrong way, you're going to have these emotional responses that you don't want. Some examples are fight, flight, or freeze. And that's what you don't want any one of these options. So if you use these technical jargon or this BS speak sometimes with too much data or not enough data or the wrong data or just making it overcomplicated, these responses you're going to have. One is fight. That's an action that you'll get from your audience. They put their hands up. Why am I here? Why am I listening to this? I don't care. The immediate response is to fight what you're trying to tell them. And a certain percentage of your audience will always do that, but you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Or another response is to flight, to run away. This happens quite a bit in government organizations. This isn't my problem. This is not for me. Maybe John in accounting, they need to listen to this, but it's not me. It's not my domain. So this doesn't affect me. When this data set maybe contain multiple jurisdictions, and maybe it does. But then the initial response is to run away. This is not me. This is not my project. It doesn't fit within my priorities. So I'm running away from what you're telling me. Or my favorite, the freeze. And this response happens, sometimes when we present data incorrectly to make a point, because it's overwhelming the audience. And Craig, you kind of mentioned that earlier. You'll have the deer in the headlights stare, the blank stare after you get through presenting, or you get through giving your audience all this data, all this factual stuff. You can back it up. It's 100% accurate. And they look at you and say, okay, no idea what you just talked about. So there's a little bit of priorities there. So there's a lot to go over, and we got some more ideas to convey. I think this is a good point in the presentation to ask our audience another poll question.
Yes, thanks so much, Bill. And you are absolutely right, because this poll question gets to the heart of the matter, because we're looking at how confident are you in your organization's current capabilities to initiate a data storytelling initiative. And it's funny that you asked this poll question, because our good friend in the chat, Amanda, said, I'm working on an executive presentation right now, and I'm trying to influence the business to fund critical IT modernization for their legacy systems. This is our third revisit with the group, and no success quite yet. And I think, it's something that a lot of us face on multiple occasions, right? You present a story and you're like, well, it seems obvious that this is what we need to do. And for some reason, for whatever reason, it doesn't resonate. You go back and you try again. And perhaps for our friend Amanda, third time will be the charm. But part of it could be what you all were just talking about, in that the data, for whatever reason, isn't resonating so well. Bill, what advice do you have if you're trying to crack that apple, let's say, for the third time to really get through? That
is a great question. And that's something that I have dealt with a lot in my career, of how to crack that apple. And I'm going to cover this a little bit later in today's session, but the direct answer is the order matters, the order of operations, okay? And that can be spread out over time. And just a little, tickler for the next few minutes is, we tend to start with the solution first. Hey, I have the solution to your problems. We're going to install this new thing. It's going to be awesome, blah, blah, blah. Until your audience or your executives believes, goes back to the belief system, believes that there is a problem, your solution doesn't do anything. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So why go in with the solution unless you convince them there is a problem? So the order matters. We'll talk about that in a second. And also the little bit of insight is you have to say something 10 times before anybody listens to you, okay? Matt, and this could be a whole nother session, is the art of the elevator pitch, okay? You need to elevator pitch your idea, not the solution, but the idea that there is a problem and there's a potential thing coming in the future. A lot of times we hit the gas and go right into the third base before we lay the groundwork. You must elevator pitch it at least 10 times, 3 different ways, okay? All right, this is kind of off sidetrack. This is not in our presentation, but this is good stuff, okay? Three different ways. One is going up, okay? When I was working for Craig, I would elevator pitch him every time we met at the coffee shop. You know, every time we pouring coffee in the break room, hey, Greg, you know this thing was going on? I mean, short 30-second spiel just to plant the seed. You must elevator pitch. You must craft and develop 3 elevator pitches. One's going up to the executives above you. The other one is lateral with your peers. If you're the director of accounting or IT, you must have a elevator pitch directed towards your peers and a lateral movement. And this is solving their problems. It cannot be an IT thing. You can't go in there solving an IT problem because that's your problem, not theirs. Your elevator pitch is identify a problem that they have and let them and converse around that. And then probably the most important, everybody forgets, you also got an elevator pitch going down, okay, to your employees, to the line level workers in every department. They have to believe it. I can't tell you how many projects has failed because the executive goes and eats lunch with, someone that's boots on the ground working. Hey, what do you think about this thing Bill's kind of do? Is it going to work? Nah, we tried that 10 years ago. It ain't going to work. Then it's dead, no matter how good it is. So elevator pitch, up, lateral, and down 10 times every direction before you go into the next phase. And I'll stop there because I can go all day about that.
I love it. All right. Here's the results of the poll. In coming in pretty, like 10%, 13% above everything else is somewhat confident. So we're feeling lukewarm is what I would say here, gentlemen.
Yeah, I agree with that. So that doesn't surprise me when I see that, Emily and Bill. I mean, I think, but the original question we had too about data literacy, right? So in some ways, either culturally or by strategy, an organization has to first say to itself, I have something important. This data is very, very important. And to use it inside of an organization may mean breaking down certain barriers, creating a culture of data literacy, doing something like that with entities outside the organization is much, much more challenging, but the similar rules apply. One of the hands down most challenging efforts that I ever dealt with in government was really about sharing data across different entities, for sure. But one of the things we talk about too, from a visualization perspective, is the fact that we are inundated with data, right? So we have, in our second poll question, organizations that feel somewhat ready, and so you get this very strange sort of seesaw idea here, which is that one concept is, wow, we are ready. We want to change the world. We want to solve problems with data. Maybe I'm making a pitch, like Amanda. Maybe it's about efficiencies. Maybe it's external, and maybe my pitch is about the citizen experience kind of thing. But one of the challenges that we need to keep top of mind is that there is so much data, right? One of the things we are grappling with is, first changing the culture so that data literacy and using data to solve problems is part of it. But then it's also grappling with this incredible amount of data, right, that we have. So many times we talk about at least the 3 V's of data, sometimes the 4th V, right? So of course, the first is volume. We have an incredibly large volume of data, right? The first V. Secondly, it comes at us at a lot, very, very fast speed. It's velocity, right? I have a lot of it. It comes at me very quickly, and there is a variety of the data, right? In other words, it may be structured, it may be unstructured, it may be social, who knows, right? But there is so much of it. And the fourth one, which I think sort of plays in the world we live in today, is veracity. Is this real, right? Is this a deep fake? What am I dealing with? So you have to really acknowledge that the data literacy and the culture of being ready to do that comes at a price. The price is the data is coming at you quickly in very large amounts, and the variety can be different. And you have to really think about, is it true? Is it real and true? So to speak to that, from 2018, Forbes magazine, I think it's really incredible because the numbers are probably so much higher today. But in this piece, real quickly, I think there are 2 data points that really speaks to this concept of the volume of data. One, that there's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day. And 2, just in the last 2 years, 90% of the world's data has been generated. Sort of hard to kind of even think about and put those things in your head, right? So again, you're not just building a culture that appreciates and uses data, you're really grappling with this exponential growth of data. The growth is exponential to the point that it has been called the industrial revolution of data. And I actually love that from Joel Hellerstein at UC Berkeley, right? Because as soon as you sort of say industrial revolution, it sort of paints this picture of the societal changes that have occurred, right? Because it kind of brings you back to the industrial revolution of a couple of centuries ago. And then it helps you to understand what we're grappling with, right? So again, it's not just the amount of data, this industrial revolution of it. If you think about what we talked about a second ago with generative AI, you have these changes coming at you very, very, very quickly. And that is the challenge that we have to grapple with, right? So this exponential growth of data, you want the culture in your organization to be a data-centric culture, a culture that shares data, a culture that's committed to solving problems, but you have to be able to understand it. You have to be able to contextualize it, process it, extract value from it. And we're talking about visualizing it. And then ultimately, communicate it, right? I might even say influence with it and influence the decision sort of processes, which is what we're talking about, right? That is what we are trying to kind of get at today. So ultimately, effective storytelling with these visualizations helps you to reveal patterns and communicate, and you want to do so while offloading cognition, right? That is, you want to be able to do the things that Bill talked about, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't burden folks with doing it, right? So you can get some, really, really maybe not effective ways to help folks communicate. And I think a lot of us see this. So it's very, very possible, whether it's a 3D graph or something that's even animated, to really go overboard, right? So you have all this data, you have this culture, but this may not be terribly effective, right? It may not be effective at all. So you want to be able to have the integrity of the data. You want to keep it simple, right? You want to keep it very straightforward. I love Bill's, up, down, and lateral. That is a fabulous way to think about it, right? Keep it very, very simple in what you do, using color well. And again, you want to be able to tell a story as you kind of make your pitch, right? That may be with key indicators and metrics, right? If you're doing a visualization for business optimization or that kind of thing. So that is what we are, thinking about and looking at in terms of what it is that we're doing. So to pivot, we talked about the organizational side, right? It's very strategy focused, but there's a very other component to this, which is the compelling side of a people value story, right? It's really about people, right? So necessarily, instead of maybe not being focused on strategy, you are individual focused, right? You may do this with testimonials, you may do it. So two very different and yet I think exceedingly powerful ways to be able to do that, to be able to tell these stories in a way that's meaningful. But here's the thing, and this is why we're together today, right? Some of us aren't necessarily a natural storyteller. Bill talked about this pivot to how to do this well, the time that we spent together. So Bill, how do we go about grappling with the skills that we need, right? The method for crafting a good story. How do we do that?
Well, Craig, you're being very generous when you said some of us are not good. You're actually saying that, Bill, you're not very good at it.
No.
Because I can admit I'm not very good at it. I'm a classic IT guy. Give me the pizza under the door. Let me get to my computer stuff. I was never really good at the soft skills, small talk, presentation, things like this we're doing today, especially not good at storytelling. And as you mentioned earlier, Craig, it's a skill set that just like you have to learn about data analytics or server administration or programming, whatever, you have to hone that skill and practice it. And there's some strategies around that as well. And so I had to do that. I had to learn how to craft better stories. And it's a skill that I'm continuing to work on. So understand, even though it's not natural to you, it's still a skill set you can learn and hone and come into events like this to get better at it. And so there's some strategies here. We look at what is a story. You look at this story arc. We see this in the movies. Think about any book, any story, any movie. It has this similar story arc that you see here. At first, it starts out, things are great. Land of milk and honey, things are going well. Once upon a time, there was a princess in a castle eating strawberries. It's all good. Until something happens. There's always an event. There's a problem that something happens, and then everything crashes. Sky's falling, world's coming to an end, dark and gloom days. This is bad, 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 bad. Until something happens and our hero in the story has some just revolutionary event that just inspires and he starts climbing out of the hole. And then our hero climbs up, and at the end of the story, things get back to normal again or better than they were before. That story arc works. It works in movies, it works in books. There may be some variances, but that's pretty much what it is. If we understand that, we can craft our stories around that. So as the strategies that I've used, I took this idea and kind of made it into how to tell a technical story with data. But first, I took some ideas from Gartner on what are the key things that we need to craft stories. One is we have to listen and learn. Well, we need to know what drives. I mentioned earlier the up-down lateral approach. We can get maybe a separate graphic and data visualization for each one of them, because different graphics means different things, or different data means different things. Where we're doing, we need to know what drives them. What is those emotional things that drive them? Well, how do you do that? The typical IT mindset is, well, go ask them. Project management, what's your requirements here? And you waterfall it out. That's what we don't want to do in this case, okay? We want to do some background research. Find things that relate to them. I get asked a lot of times, what about if I'm presenting to a large audience? Well, my best advice there is to find something that appeals to the largest amount of the audience, or who are the key decision makers in the large audience. Find things that appeal to them. One of the most important areas that Gartner recommends here is to find relatable and empathetic characters. You can't just spit out a whole bunch of numbers using data. We said this repeated again and again. You got to tell a story that relates to this and use the data as evidence. But most importantly, when you develop the story, put it in their world that they understand, not in your world. And this is a key piece of the puzzle here. you have to be the guide and not the hero. I talked earlier about the hero in the story doing things. That hero cannot be you. We often get this wrong. I have research and I have this solution that's going to do this, or the IT department got this thing that's going to solve the problem. In this case, when you're telling your story using data, the person you're talking to, the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, maybe the customer or the citizen or another agency, whoever, they get to be the hero in the story, but you cannot. You get to be the guide to show them how your solution that you're talking about will allow them to be the hero. And this strategy that I kind of developed, I used the 3-act story that I showed earlier that we see in all story writing and playmaking and stuff, and turned it into how can we use this in what we're talking about today. We got the 3-act story. Basically, we wrap it up again. You have to create this hero, this character they relate to. Put your hero in a tree, set the tree on fire, then show how your hero can get out of the tree. That's what we need to do. All right. Use that with data, use that with your story, but that's your story. Create a hero, put him in a tree, set the tree on fire, get him out of the tree. So how do we do that? Well, those 3 acts. The first act I mentioned earlier, we often get this wrong. We often go straight to act 3. Here's my solution. I've done this research, Mr. CEO. Here's the solution to your problem. If we skip it and go straight to the proposed solution, we miss the opportunity to describe the current state. Act 2 is the future state, the utopia version, and then finally act 3. And this story may go over an hour to tell it, or it may go over weeks or months, depending on your situation. You may be staying in act 1 until act 1 is solid. You don't move to act 2. So this is kind of the summary here. Act 1, you introduce your hero, describe the landscape. We have this going on. We're lacking in this program adoption, sales, whatever your landscape you're doing. Notice you're not saying anything technical. Your project cannot be about technology. It's got to be about solutions and business things that make sense to whichever area you're talking to. And you outline their problems, not your problems. You outline their problems using the right data. What is the right data? It's the data that makes sense to them. Adoptions, rate of this program, voter, anything that's whatever their discipline is, you pick 1 or 2 key metrics and show the current landscape. And you have to describe it as not good. Because unless they believe internally through your story that there is a problem, no solution is ever going to matter. The first step, act 1, you have to tell the story in such a way that your current landscape describes a problem, and 2, they believe that there's a problem and they believe that they're in the problem, they're in the story. Act 2, don't go straight to your solution. Again, you just do the opposite of the current state. The current state is here's this problem. The opposite of that is this is where we are if we don't have this problem. It's the direct inverse. Then you ask the questions like what data will be evidence or an indicator of this desired future state. We're right now the current is 20%. In a perfect world, we'll be at 80 or 90%. And this don't get into how it happens. You want them as they go through the story in their head, man, I really wish someone would have a solution that has the data to put it to the, man, we can put it in a central look, that would solve it. And then all of a sudden, bam, you have the solution. Here it is. You're showing how to get from point A, the current state, to point B, the future state, with your solution. Your heroes' problems are solved. You're using data as indicators. First phase, we're at 30%. Now we're 40%. And this is what we're doing. But you're showing them how they can get from point A to point B. And that's kind of my ideas there on how to take a classic story into this mindset of from a technical mindset and using data as well. If that kind of gave you some perspective there, correct?
Yeah, Bill, I love the concept of, the inverse concept, right? I think that is such a useful concept because I think so many times our teams and our workplaces or our divisions or our groups can be so locked into what is happening that they can't see that. I think so giving them that, that look on what it could be. And, if, again, with what we're presenting today, right, it may be an organizational inverse, right? It could be productivity, right? If we did this, our productivity is going to do, it's going to jump by 20%, and that means getting the team in the field more, which was a key goal, something like that. You could use the personal side, right? You could do a testimonial. You could show what that would look like, right? If this was done, and I love doing that. And I think one of the things to keep thinking about is life happens every single day, right? And do you have any good organization or human value stories that happened, right? There are projects that are up and going. There are, especially in the data space or the data lake space, right? So these teams are sort of figuring out what that new norm is. Do you have any good stories that you can take and build upon, right? Have you ever used one to convince someone else, right? I think, and Bill noted this, right? Sort of being able to be not just an influencer, but I think the word is also a relator, right? You can do that in any number of ways. So being a relator helps you to be an influencer. It's quite possible that if these stories exist, right, that they've been documented and they're out there to be used. And maybe what you have to think about, to the exact point Bill was making, is where do you need these stories at, right? Is it a particularly intractable problem, a cultural issue that's so difficult to break or to change, which is very difficult? So being really thoughtful about where in your organization you may very well need this, I think is really, really critical to think about, right? The challenges that you may have, right? You may be doing your third pitch on your project. Maybe that's where you take a step back. And to Bill's point, you realize that if you're on try number 3, you may have more tries that you need, right? But with these techniques, you can potentially do that. So in addition to, I think, thinking about what are the stories that you have in your organization, have you used those before, even if it's, a little bit informal, you can think about these principles that we've talked about today, right? So Bill talked about this, right? The people side. Be sure that there are details, right? Details really matter if you're telling a story, right? So you need to be succinct, as we talked about, but the details matter, right? So giving that little bit of extra detail is a big deal. The stakes have to be high if you're really getting at this. So not only sort of the bad thing that could happen, but I love this concept of, the inverse of it. Like how do we change that? And, the emotional part, right? Even if a story is somewhat organizationally focused, the emotional part and really the concept of the result is what we're talking about. So really, and I think Gartner and other entities, I think, really do a nice job with this. The real influencing comes in the marriage of these things, right? It's both the organizational value, which can be strategy focused, but there's also the people value, right? The way Bill talked about the hero and sort of talking that through. And you want to be able to potentially connect, if at all possible, the rational piece with the expressive, right? The objective with the expressive, the rational and the emotional, I think is really, really critical to crafting that fully rounded side of it. So I think that's really, really an important element to think about, right? So I think the challenge is that many times these things are thought of as disparate or thought of as it's either one or the other. But in reality, you have to start with the real guts of what we're talking about, right, Bill? You have to start with data. That is really what we're talking about. So what kind of data do we need to collect? I mean, what are we thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. We can tell the best story in the world, but if we don't have the right data around it, and we talked about too much data is too much, too less data, and inappropriate data. So, a couple of strategies here. What data? How do we get started here? I think you begin with the data you have. Don't look at. We have this huge collection of data, and let's just collect it and make it fit into this thing. You know, we often do that. We have this data and we try to solve answers to questions we haven't even asked yet. And sometimes we're doing some type of crazy research. That's okay. But in this case, presenting projects forward, you need to be very targeted and specific with what data and how you choose to do it. Start with the strategic goals and work backwards. Oftentimes, I've seen just the opposite happen. I've been guilty of it as well. We have this data. Let me show that this data fits as an example why we need this solution to solve this problem, when really it should be the other way around. What is the agency, the big strategic goal? Then you work backwards from there. What is an indicator that we are achieving that goal? So it goes back to goals, strategies, objectives, action items, things like that. So what are the goals? So what's some of the strategies that we can achieve that goal? And then what's some objectives or indicators or data metrics that prove that we are meeting or not meeting these goals? Ask those questions first, then you go back, do we have this data already? If you don't, find a way to collect it. If you do, use that. Don't start off with the data and then show how it fits into a strategy. That sometimes is a recipe for failure. And I just talked about this: goals, objectives, outcomes, indicators, strategies. And you can use this for all phases. You can use this strategy to show that the current landscape, this one or two indicator that you picked, shows the other side, the business executives, the people that are not in IT. Here's an indicator that your objective, your goal is not being met. Let's work together to solve it. Don't go straight into here's a metric to show we're going to get better. Focus on insights instead of facts. Okay. And don't go, if you go into, hey, look at this metric, we're at 20% above this and so many kilowatts of power, blah, blah, blah. That's just data and fact. It doesn't mean anything. Interpret that data, especially if you're doing the pitch up to the executive. You interpret that data on insights. And you have the back end data to back it up, but it's kind of weird. You're doing a data-centric presentation, focus less on data, but more on insights instead of factual things, because they'll go right over that head. And you said this earlier, less is more. Resist the urge to overcollect, overanalyze, and report too much data. You can have that, use that different data for tactical decisions and different data for strategic decisions. Collect and report only on data that you can directly map up to a overall goal, strategy, and outcome.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so one thought I had too, as you're kind of going through this is, and we've both dealt with this, but what's top of mind in terms of dealing with someone, maybe on your team, maybe another department, that's just resistant to data? I woke up this morning and, my knee was achy, so I'm going to make this decision, right? I mean, it's not about anything analytical. It's about other stuff. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, we've both run into those kind of folks. How do you deal with those kind of folks?
Well, I think it goes back to something we talked about earlier. You have to put it in their world, okay? You have to show data should be related to something that they find important. Just saying that if you just give them, here's some important data, and you try to beat it over their head, this is important to you, you got to understand this. No, go back to something we talked about earlier. Put the story in their world, find out what's important to them. And then you work backwards, what we just talked about there. What is their strategies? What are their goals? What are their objectives? Then the data that you report may not be important to you, but it is important to them. Now, there's two different sides of that data coin you talked about. You have all this data, and you report that insight data from a strategic level. The other side of it may be something tactical. It may be the number of hard drive space or CPUs or cloud transfer rates or whatever. That's all tactical things. That doesn't mean anything to someone else. It doesn't solve their problem. That's your problem. That's an IT problem. The data you report to them has got to be very specific to their problems. Convince them there's a problem. How you do that, you show them a metric that's important to them. Now, to change that scale, to change that metric, you may have to report, you may have to do some internal reporting on your technical side, but you have to make the metrics in their world. So that's my biggest advice for strategy on people who are resistant to data.
Yeah, fabulous. Emily, do we have a poll question? Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. All right. So here is the final poll question. And for this one, we want to know, in your organization, how effective has storytelling been used to make impactful decisions? And I'm going to give you about a minute or so to answer this poll question. And while you do, I'm curious from both of you, and maybe Bill, I'll start with you, but then Craig, I definitely want your insights on this as well. I think I mentioned at the beginning that for a person like me, I like to make all these sessions about me, clearly. Data is intimidating. Like, I am not a numbers person. I have never been, say, the person that got all A's in math classes back in the day. Statistics, ooh, shiver up the spine. So when someone says, hey, you need data as a way to better make your perspective ring, or make it sound more compelling, sometimes that can be really intimidating to a person like me. How do you kind of, Bill, think about that from folks who might be not necessarily resistant because you don't know the value, but maybe just numbers or data itself can be a little bit more challenging?
Great question. And I'm intimidated by data today. Especially we talk about all the volume that Craig displayed. It's very intimidating. I may sound like a broken record, but I would look at what is important to you. So if you were looking at what decisions or what key initiatives do you need to move your job forward, to move your program forward, and you look at that, then you say, well, what is an indicator that it's successful or not? Whatever it is, you may not know that the data exists. Put data in the side pocket. What is an indicator that this is a successful program or project or whatever you're working on, or an agency? What is one indicator? Start with one. What is an indicator? And then you start asking the questions, all right, where does that data live? We have an indicator that shows this level of success or mastery. Does this data exist? If it doesn't, okay, let's have some conversations in terms of how do we collect that data over time to show a trend. If you start there, it's less intimidating. So when you get the data back, you start interpreting it. It makes sense because it's something that that can move your level of success higher or lower.
Love it. Craig, what advice do you have for folks like me?
Well, I think Bill and I are a great complement on this, because I think the reason we wanted to talk about visualizing data is because I think it's a way to make it less intimidating, right? I mean, there's a ton of technique about how to do that well. But, I'm not coming at you with, correlations or standard deviations or anything like that when I'm presenting. Right. So I think the ability to visualize it, and that's the phrase we use, right? It sort of reduces that cognitive load, and it helps you to feel comfortable. And, Emily, it may even help you to feel confident. Right. But because, if you lock up as soon as someone says, I ran a regression model, let's talk about it. If you lock up over that, if I show you something, right? So marrying Bill's point of it's something that you can relate to, but I'm able to show you something visually, that may be the way to do it.
Craig, I just got to jump in. I love it helps with confidence. You may be intimidated, but once you find that right data, that magic point of this is what makes sense to you, you're confident about the decisions you're made. Sometime in the future, you get asked the question, well, why did you do X instead of Y? Well, it's because this is our baseline and we showed the data here and you're more confident about what you're doing. But it starts with finding that right data that works for you.
Yes. Yeah. And as soon as you do that, you've made an ally in your workplace, right? That ally can appreciate that. And I think that's critical.
All right. Well, we are rapidly running out of time. I want to thank both Craig and Bill for sharing your insights with us. And I have one final question for both of you. Craig, I'll start with you on this one. What do you want attendees to walk away from this session thinking about or knowing?
Well, I think the one thing, Emily, is something we've touched on, which is, right, we are not going to run away from data in the world we live in, right? It really doesn't matter the job you have, right? You could be as far away from a data scientist as possible. So I think becoming comfortable, thoughtful, and really acknowledging that the power that it has when you put it inside of a story to tell, I think is what I would leave folks with.
I love it. All right, Bill, what are we walking away knowing?
Well, I have the unique ability to say what Craig said. Yeah, the having the right metrics to put into a story is beyond powerful. But I had to leave the audience with one thing: is something I said earlier. Get the story right. Don't go into your presentation or to your story with the solution first. Resist that urge. That's the urge we have. Resist the urge with showing them a solution until they believe a problem exists, and you can use data to do that.
All right. Those are wise words to end us on. So thank you, gentlemen, so much for sharing your insights with us. We're all going to be much more confident when it comes to data stemming from this presentation. But the great content, well, it's not over. You all can join me in about 15 minutes over in the conference hall for our lunch keynotes. There we'll be talking about owning your journey because, well, no one's planning your career for you, inclusion in action, and, well, nothing ever stays the same. We all know this. Change is coming. So how are we going to embrace it and perhaps not fight it quite as much? I'll see you over there in about 15 minutes. Thank you all so much for joining this session, and I'll see you soon. Bye.